tennis because my girlfriend played tennis. And so I was either going to be a tennis widow or I was going to learn, or widower really, or learn to play tennis. And I started to do that. As I like to say about my tennis game, if you hit the ball near me, I can hit it back. But at my age, I like to say that I'm geographically challenged. So moving around the court, diving for balls isn't high on my list of things to do. So now I play on two teams. One is the 50s and over, and then the 70s and over. And they're obviously different levels of competition. One thing good about Fort Myers is there aren't many 50-year-old tennis players playing here. Most of them are my age. And then I also play on the 70s. For example, I have a match tomorrow with my 70s team. We play another local team. They're coming here, and we'll be matched up against. We'll be playing against their best players and ours. So we're looking forward to a very competitive match and have a lot of fun.
That's interesting that in your athletic days of playing college baseball, that 50, 60 years later, you can be playing competitively again. And again, we had a little technical difficulty at first. This is Dennis Lapidus, who played baseball at Northwestern and grew up in Chicago. When you talk about some of these master basketball leagues and NBA players, any in particular that you can remember that you played with that became fairly famous basketball players? I played against a center named Leroy Ellis, who played 10 years for the Lakers. Oh, yeah.
He was a 6'10" center, and when we played against him, he quickly got our center into foul trouble. Our center was 6'6", who had actually played college basketball for Creighton and was quite accomplished, but Leroy was quite a load for him. So I was the next biggest guy on the team at the time, and I had to spend my time guarding him. I'll tell you what my recollection of that was, as I started to guard him, my only chance to guard him was to lean on him and hold him. And I noticed that his elbow was right about my chin and teeth level. So I said to him, listen, if my holding you bothers you, tell me first before you knock my head off. And he never said a word, but to his credit, he didn't do it. So I was glad that I could body him and do the best job I could, being 6'4" versus 6'10" and playing in the NBA. We had a heck of a match until we could put our center back on him. He
was a great player, and some of our basketball tennis fans will remember that because some of them are from Kentucky, that for a year his son Lee Ron Ellis went to Kentucky and then transferred to Syracuse and played with Ronnie Cycli, and I think they did very
right.
well.
And his son played in the NBA as well. So that was I'm not sure if that's a fond memory, but that's one of the guys that we played against. We played against a guy named Jim Barnett, who played in the NBA. I think he played for Golden State or he played for San Francisco before it was Golden State.
With not Bill Russell. He was at college at San Francisco. Not to be confused with Dick Barnett, who was the backcourt mate of Clyde Frazier in New York. Well, what our tennis buddies here probably want to find this interesting, that you went to Northwestern with not only Marty Reeson, but also Clark Graebner. Is that correct?
It is correct. Marty Reeson and I graduated the same year in the middle 60s, and Clark Graebner was a year younger than Marty. And we had a very good tennis team, obviously, because we had two guys who turned out to have very successful pro careers. In those days, I didn't think much of tennis, didn't play any tennis, and so I didn't watch any tennis. But Marty also was a starting guard on our basketball team and had a really strong basketball career.
Was he a good player?
I mean, he was a very good basketball player.
Was he a shooter type or a playmaker type?
He was more of a playmaker type, but he could shoot the ball too. He was really, really a very good athlete, understood the game, and important part of our team. We really had a pretty good basketball team while he was playing.
Well, Clark was known as kind of being a fiery guy. As a matter of fact, there's this famous picture in world tennis where Ilya Nastase, who's breaking everybody's balls, he just got him around there with a clenched fist. So Clark was pretty tough. I think Clark might have been from Cleveland originally.
He was,
yeah,
as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Marty, as I recall, was from Hinsdale, Illinois. And like I said, he had a successful two-sport career. Um, the story I think I told you, and I'll tell you again, is at Northwestern, we had two kinds of male athletes. Marty was male athlete of the year my senior year, and I was, after that, I am athlete of the year. So we both were honored at a ceremony. His was a little more prestigious than mine, but still it was a lot of fun to be on the stage with Marty.
Wow. Yeah. So that's interesting. Just a little bit, because we don't want to gloss over this, but what was it like playing baseball in the Big Ten in that day, in the late 60s,
Well,
mid 60s?
believe it or not, it becomes a blur at this time. I mean, we had one of the guys I remember on our team was a guy named Jay Hook, who was an engineer, as I was, and he wrote and he actually wound up graduating from Northwestern and playing in the major leagues for a little bit, actually more than a little bit. And he wrote a paper talking about how do you make a baseball curve? Do baseballs really curve? Because there was some thought that it was really only an optical illusion. Baseballs didn't move, but he proved that they did move.
Really?
Yes. And so Jay was, when I was a freshman, Jay was a senior. And obviously we didn't mix a lot because in those days, freshmen couldn't play in the Big Ten. So I was just, we just played amongst ourselves and we'd scrimmage against the varsity.
And then when you were playing, how many pitches did you actually have? I mean, you got a fastball, you got a curveball.
I had a slider, and every so often I would throw a little knuckleball, but usually it didn't move and it went out faster than I threw it. So I didn't throw that too much.
I see. Now, we flash forward, and now you are in your 70s and you're playing tennis on two different teams, a 70 and over team and then another team. Is that correct? So,
well, actually, I to be honest with you, I'd like to say that I'm in my 70s, but I just turned 81. So I'm I like to think you think that I'm younger than I am, but I'm not. So yes, I'm playing on the 70s, and I'm very happy to be out there. And what I say to my opponents, I say, play well, have a good match, and don't hurt yourself. And I say the same thing to myself. So we have, at our age, we're doing that. We're being competitive, and we shake hands and have a beer afterwards.
So that's great. Now, transitioning into tennis, you weren't really a tennis player. You just you played more golf than you did tennis, I guess, in your mid years.
Right.
And so now you're playing and what's your favorite thing other than obviously the socialization, camaraderie? But when you're out there playing, you're obviously very competitive, right?
Yes.
That hasn't really changed, has it?
No.
Have you? And you've learned, because you were a young tennis player in your later years, where you really started playing multiple times a week. And what have you learned lately, like in terms of how to compete better? Obviously, the preparation is, and being able to be fit or at least healthy is one. But what about on the court? What have you learned?
Well, I think the thing you want to take advantage of is spotting the other team's weaknesses. If players are lobbing against you, then obviously and they're good at it, you really can't both be at the net. You have to play one up and one back. But if they don't do that, the idea, of course, as you know, is to try and take the net and make them play. You may not be able to see this, but I'm 6'4" with a pretty generous wingspan. So as I like to say about my game these days, I'm geographically challenged. So my wingspan helps me to play the net well, especially if I have a partner who's quicker, who can go back and cover from some of the stuff I can't. We've been pretty successful competing against some of the other players.
And what do you think is your best shot in your arsenal?
Well, I think what I try and do best is to try and hit the ball deep with pace, because most of the players have difficulty with that. And then if they hit a weak return, my partner or I, by the net, can put those away. So if we can do that, we found ourselves to be pretty successful. Or really at our level, hitting it to the opponent's backhand. If you can make the most opponent's backhand is much weaker than their forehand. So I found that if you hit it with pace to their backhand, it's another way to accomplish the same thing.
have you found just by playing with different doubles partners, or maybe in some cases the same doubles partner multiple times, that you all actually bond as friends as much or more than if you were casual acquaintances because of that? I don't know.
I think that's a very good question. There's one guy I play with in particular. His name is John Fleming. He's a Brit and now is an American retired Ford employee, Ford executive, really. We've become good friends and we play together as much as we can. We try and play in the doubles tournaments together. We have a lot of fun. John covers the court very well, and we've found ourselves liking each other and being very successful competing against other teams. So yes, there's other players that I've met and become friends with through our camaraderie and competition on the tennis court.
The last thing that I want to ask you, Dennis, and I appreciate you coming in and talking with me, is you spent a lot of time on the golf course, and you belong to one of the most prestigious golf courses in the country at Medina Country Club in Chicago. What do you think are the similarities and differences, if you can pick one out of one similarity that golf has and one difference that golf has?
It really is. I think it's the same for a lot of sports, but golf and tennis are the same. I mean, if your opponent is going to take an 8 on a hole, all you need is a 7 to beat him. So unless you have some ego about you have to shoot par to beat somebody, even though they're in trouble. I think the strategies are the same. You want to see what your opponent is doing, and you just want to win by 1 point is the whole idea. And I think golf and tennis are the same. You see what the opponent's doing. If he hits more shots out than you or into the net than you, that's all you care about. Whether you hit it on the frame or on the end of the strings, important thing is whether you won the point or not. As I like to say about my golf and my tennis, there's no pictures on my scorecard. Winning by 1 works just fine for me.
And then what any differences? What about in the technique of how to hit the ball? You see any similarities or differences?
Yeah, I think that it's the same kind of thing. You know, one of the things that people don't do is, especially under pressure, they stop trying to hit the ball. They try and steer the ball. You can steer the ball in any sport, whether it's pitching in baseball. You can steer it when you get in trouble, or sometimes the right way is to just throw it. And the same with tennis, and the same with golf. You have to trust your swing and play it that way.
I see. Dennis,
you can't play not to lose. In other words,
who is the best, the most famous athlete you've ever teed it up with on the golf course in a foursome? Can you give us some names? Anybody?
Well, I've played with Jim McMahon when he's come to Medina. I've played with Bob Avellini, who was a Bear quarterback for 10 years, and we've stayed friends all these years. And I think off the top of my head, those are the two most. Well, I've also played in Chicago regularly with a guy named Bill Erfurth. Bill is now in his 90s. He's in the Illinois Golf Hall of Fame, and he is a friend and a gentleman, and he's a pleasure to play with. And I feel very fortunate to have met him and played with him all these years.
Who do you think were a couple of the best golfers ever to come out of Chicagoland area?
Well, I'm trying to think. Well, the guys I played with were Mike Harrigan, who was a retired pro at Medina. He's in the Illinois Golf Hall of Fame. Bill Erfurth he's from Texas, and he's in the Illinois Golf Hall of Fame. He was a longtime head pro at Skokie Country Club, and Mike Harrigan was a longtime pro at Medina Country Club. And those are two of my favorites of people I played with over the years.
It seems like there was a guy, a foreigner that went to Northwestern that was on the tour and still kind of maybe.
Luke Donald?
Luke Donald, that's right.
Yes,
and he's a Brit, isn't he?
He is a Brit, and I never played with him.
But he'd probably be the most famous Northwestern player.
Well, I think there's one who was at Northwestern for about a month, Matt Fitzgerald.
Oh, that's right.
The Northwestern coach brought him to a gathering. We had a golf outing for Northwestern, and he said to Matt, since you're from Britain, you know how to hit low 5 irons into the wind. Tell the people here what you think when you want to hit a low 5 iron into the wind. Matt said, "Well, I think low 5 iron into the wind, and I do it." He, and the coach said, "Well, that's not exactly what will help people much, but the principle is the same. It's like saying, what do you think about when you want to hit a topspin forehand? Well, for the pros, they just hit it, but for amateurs, they've got to think about a little bit more about the technique. And I think that's one story I remember the most. Think low 5 iron into the wind." So.
And I guess when you in Chicago, I'm sure you attended many of the Bulls games during their run.
I did.
It must have been fun to watch.
It was obviously I had seats during the Jordan years, and I would go to as many games as I wanted. But truthfully, I also was a season ticket holder for Northwestern basketball. And even though we didn't have a very good team, I'd much rather go watch Big Ten basketball than the Bulls, even though they were so good. College basketball to me is still the ultimate sport.
What did you think of Bobby Knight as a coach?
Obviously, he was a character, but I loved what he did as a coach. I thought he was a tremendous coach, and I was able to look past the things he did. I just enjoyed watching him coach.
Yeah, he was something else, and there were a lot of good coaches in the Big Ten down through the years, players. But Dennis, thanks for joining me, and enjoyed talking to you and getting a little history.
My pleasure.
About Dennis Lapidus, Chicago, Illinois, and Fort Myers.
Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Everybody, this is Gary Plock signing off. Now, I did everything right except